In 1943, as a hurricane was making landfall near Galveston, Texas, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Duckworth was sitting down to breakfast with some British pilots. They were teasing him about the reliability of American planes. To prove them wrong, Duckworth bet them a highball that he could fly through a storm in an AT-6 Texan single-engine trainer. He and his co-pilot took off from Bryan Field and successfully flew through the hurricane and returned safely. That flight helped the Air Corps realize the value of flying into storms to measure their intensity and provide better warnings. From then on, regular reconnaissance flights were made into tropical storms and hurricanes. Fast forward 80 years, and there are several planes from both the U.S. Air Force and NOAA that fly into not only hurricanes, but also northeast winter storms and west coast atmospheric rivers. In today's episode, we soar into the turbulent world of weather aircraft reconnaissance. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie, and you're listening to Off the Radar, a production of the National Weather Desk. On the show, we dig deep into topics about weather, climate, the ocean, space, and much, much more. Our goal is to help you better understand the weather and to love it as much as we do. Flying through a hurricane has to be quite a thrill ride. Listen to Jonathan Shannon from NOAA comparing it to a roller coaster ride.
But the best analogy I've gotten is being in a car wash on a roller coaster. So basically an old wooden roller coaster, but sort of the same sensation of a car wash, just fire hose on the windows. So
when I worked in local television, there were numerous opportunities to fly with the hurricane hunters on media flights. But seeing as I break into a cold sweat on a 2-hour Southwest flight, it was a hard pass for me. Aircraft reconnaissance missions into tropical storms have morphed quite a bit over the years. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Rickert is an Air Force flight meteorologist with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. He's flown on over 100 missions ranging from winter storms to Cat 5 hurricanes.
Hurricane Irma, I flew on that storm as it basically peaked. So we could tell from the air at 10,000 feet. That was very humbling. Like, wow, like Cat 5 just wiped this island out.
In today's episode, Ryan and I chat about his life and career flying into storms with the Air Force. So sit back, strap in as we take flight into the exhilarating world of hurricane hunting. Ryan, this is very exciting to talk to you. You're a man on the go. Your life is about to get a lot crazier here in the next couple of months, I'm sure. So I'm glad we got a hold of you and could talk about your career, because this is really cool stuff. Can you take me through the process of what it is the hurricane hunter does? Are you flying the plane? Are you dropping the instrument packs? What role do you play?
Well, I'm actually the meteorologist, the flight meteorologist on the plane. So we're in control of all the weather information that goes off the plane to the National Hurricane Center. And also in the wintertime, we fly winter storms off the West Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic. It's a pretty significant part of what we do. The atmospheric rivers that hit the West Coast and impact the United States. And eventually a lot of those storms turn into ones that impact the rest of the United States. So those ones are very drop-son intensive. The instruments that we drop out of our airplanes that are basically the opposite of what a weather balloon does. You see these big white balloons that are launched from the ground up. They go as high as they possibly can, and then they burst and then fall to the surface of the earth while recording data all the way up. Drop-sons that are about 20 inches long, and they're cylinders, and we launch them from our airplane down to the surface of the ocean, and those record the same exact data that a weather balloon records. And that is high resolution data that gets put into the forecast models, and it makes them a lot more accurate because wherever we fly over the oceans, it's very data sparse areas. There's no weather information that's being put into the models mostly over those locations. So that's a big chunk of what we do and why we do it. And then of course the more exciting part of our mission, flying into the hurricanes and the cyclones in the northern hemisphere, they can be very exciting. Sometimes they're not as exciting because we have to get to them. So we'll fly 3 hours sometimes en route to these storms where it's very mundane. You're pretty much just ferrying to the location. And then you'll fly anywhere from 3 to 6 hours in the storm doing different patterns, collecting different data that the Hurricane Center wants you to collect. And then when we're done with our mission, then we fly back home for 3 hours of very mundane, ferry flight back home or wherever we're flying out of. So all in all, our job is pretty exciting when we're in the storm environment and doing the mission part of it. But, to and from, I would say that the rest of the crew is a little more busy than we are at that time. For example, the pilots are flying the aircraft, the navigators navigating for us. And then we also have a load master in the back with us that launches the dropsondes for us. So everyone has their own role in the airplane. We're all a crew, though, and we all have to ensure that the safety of the aircraft and safety of the crew is paramount. That's our number one priority.
You're with the Air Force, but there are different branches of hurricane hunters, correct?
Kind of, yes. There is us, which we have 10 WC-130J aircraft, and we're the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, and do primarily the brunt of the operational mission taskings that NHC asks us to do. There is also the NOAA AOC Air Operations Center. They're part of Department of Commerce, and they have one G4 and two P3 aircraft. So 3 total. The G4 does a different type of mission. They fly very high and launch those weather instruments I spoke of earlier. They drop around the environment to make the models more accurate. And then the P3 aircraft can fly similar missions of us. They're more research focused and learning about the storm structure. They have scientists that fly on their airplanes with them, and they'll have different things they want them to do and different patterns they want them to fly in the storm environment to learn more about the storm, learn more about hurricanes and cyclones. And they have different instrumentation on the aircraft that we don't have currently to learn more about the storms. So they can augment us and they can do a similar type of mission, but they're primarily focused on research and using their tail Doppler radars to get different information into the models that we aren't able to get into the models.
Okay, so hurricane hunters is kind of the overall term that we call you guys. Do you think that term is going to change in the coming years? Because you're hunting a lot more than hurricanes these days.
True. I mean, that's really, it comes down to what we were founded upon back in the early to mid 1940s. So we were founded based on that. So that's what we were founded on. That's what we started doing. And that was what we did for a decade. I think that's just something that's, we were founded upon. So I don't know if it'll necessarily change. But what we have started to do is on our tails, we have on 8 of our aircraft, it says Hurricane Hunters. We're changing it back to just weather. It's just going to say weather on it because we do weather reconnaissance for not only the hurricane mission, the operational hurricane mission, and NHC, but we are also doing the winter, a lot more winter. And it actually it's gaining a lot of steam. We go out there for 2 months straight and fly these missions. This past year was a record year. I don't know if you followed the weather in the West Coast, but they got pummeled and extreme droughts were basically wiped away in a lot of portions of California and Oregon and Washington. So yeah, I don't know if our name will change, but we are known for other types of missions.
So do you move in the winter? Do you move to the West Coast and that's where you're based out of?
We do. We take a couple aircraft out there and then we rotate our crews every 2 weeks. So we'll just so somebody doesn't have to stay out there for a month or 2 months at a time. We basically have volunteer blocks where we have people sign up for 2-week blocks and we break it up into 4. So that way everyone will have a chance to go out there for 2 weeks, fly that type of mission, come home and then just do their administrative jobs that we have here located at our unit. But we'll be out there on station for 2 months. And then this past year, we opened it up to being basically on call. So if there was a storm that they were really concerned with, that it was going to be a big weather producer, they could ask for tasking to task us. And then we would tell them if we had the airplanes and the crews available to go fly it. And one case we did, and then a couple cases we didn't, because with our growing seasons, we've basically now are 10 months out of 12 months operational, between the hurricane mission or the tropical mission and the winter. So now there's really not much of a break for our aircraft and our maintainers that are supporting it. So it's just continued to be a growing mission. It's at the highest levels of our government, the impact that these storms have on the West Coast. So it's not going anywhere. So we just got to be able to figure out how to balance that with our manning, the support of it, our aircraft, our maintainers, and everything that goes along with it.
How long have you been doing this, and how did you get started in it?
So I joined the Air Force in 2002. So I've been almost 21 years now. I served active duty for 13, transitioned from active duty to the Air Force Reserves. And so I applied just like anybody else would for a normal job. They have to have the opening to hire into. And I applied like a normal applicant, and came and interviewed in front of a bunch of people, and they asked questions, and then they let you know a couple weeks later that I got hired. So, but I got hired as a part-timer initially. And then as a full-time position opened up, applied and got that position as well. So for my position, I have to have a meteorology degree background, have to be a commissioned weather officer in the Air Force to do what I do. And then it comes with a lot more training here, because I've never flown an aircraft on a crew before. So we have to teach our flight meteorologists how to be a crew member, what it means to be a part of a crew, and be on the airplane and learn about all the safety things. And, so that we're not a liability to the crew, we're actually a part of the crew. And then we have to teach them the specialized, academics that are involved with directing the tropical mission. So it takes about a year and a half to 2 years to be fully qualified to do our position once you enter the unit here.
So tell me about the ride itself and what it's like to be in the plane when you're flying through a hurricane. I have a lot of questions about if it's a bumpy ride, where you're going to the bathroom, because you're talking about hours and hours here that you're in the plane, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're in the plane for
a potty on board.
There is. It's not spectacular. But it's a platform and a toilet, it's out at the back of the plane. So there's a curtain, of course, for privacy. And yes, you need to use it because we're out there on our winter missions, 8 to 12 hours, and our tropical missions average 8 to 10 and could be up to 12 hours. So you're in the plane for almost half a day. You have to take multiple meals. I mean, you eat a lot of food, so there's a microwave.
So you're not bringing
board.
Burritos on board, are you?
Well, I mean, sometimes people warm them up we have a microwave, a small microwave that works 90 to 95% of the time. And then as far as the ride goes, the winter and the tropical are much different. The winter, we fly as high as we possibly can. So we're not, most of the time, I would say 90 to 95% of the time, we're not in weather. We're above the weather. The winter are low moisture, low in altitude. All the moisture in the weather is very low. And as it gets closer to the West Coast, it, of course, rises and causes a lot of precip when it hits the coast and the mountains. So we're above most of the weather. Sometimes we have a turbulence up high and some icing. So it's a little different aspect. When we're in the tropical missions, we're a lot lower. We're flying anywhere from 500 feet to up to 10,000 feet, which means we're flying right through thunderstorms. We're intersecting it. So the ride can be a lot more turbulent, a lot more crazy. We can get struck by lightning. We can experience extreme turbulence as we're going through Category 5 eye walls of hurricanes. But sometimes it's mundane. It just depends. Every system is different. Every tropical system is different, and what we're doing. If we're very low in altitude, we're trying to avoid those thunderstorms. We're not going to fly through a thunderstorm at 500 feet because we have very little room for maneuver. If we get caught in a downdraft, we're very close to the ocean.
Not only thunderstorms, but do you ever run into tornadoes? I mean, hurricanes can spawn tornadoes. Does that ever happen?
So we'll see water spouts over the water. We'll avoid those if we see them. And then as you start getting into the eye walls of hurricanes, that's where you'll start seeing hook echoes, or mesovortices rotating around the inside of the eyes. And we'll try to cheat and avoid those as we're intersecting coming through the eye wall. So we try to hit the softest spot on the eye wall, but there's 50 to 75% of the time we can't really maneuver because it's so turbulent. And the more maneuvering you do in that environment, the more prone you are to, tipping, getting the wing, tipping the wings as we start turning, and you don't want to get caught on the updraft on one of your sides of your airplane because then you're just going to get flipped. It's going to cause severe damage to the airplane. So try to stay flat, straight and level. We can do some small turns in the eye walls, but if it starts getting really turbulent, we basically know where we're going. We're going to the eye, and we get into the eye. Then we start maneuvering to find that center fix of the storm.
Do you ever get scared, or have you been doing this long enough now that you know that this is just normal? And then I'm also curious, have there ever been situations where you guys have really been in danger or something terrible has happened?
It's pretty much normal. Like once you start out in training, you're kind of like, oh, whoa, but then it turns into your normal day, your normal job. There are some that are definitely gnarly situations. Shall I say, there's been a couple times where I've been on flights where we've kind of got caught in an eye wall where we couldn't get out of it because we ended up getting tailwinds and we didn't want to make drastic turns. So now you have a huge tailwind behind you, and that can cause
Are you just
problems.
going in circles at that point?
Well, yeah, like you kind of you start working your way around the eye wall. So that's bad. You don't want too much ground speed. You don't want too much speed. You don't want to be too slow because then you can stall. So we fly at 180 knots, which is rough air penetration speed. So it allows for very good maneuverability in that type of environment. However, getting caught in the eye wall that's not good because then you get a lot of tail speed, tailwind. Then you can't maneuver the aircraft. So I've been in a couple of situations like that. Some of the storms, there's a lot of land interaction or mountain wave interaction on the west coast of Mexico. We get some really, really rough storms over there where it's constant. The plane is just shaking.
Gotcha. Do people get sick up there, like the newbies? Are they up there?
Not really. I mean, there's been a couple people that's come through that it's just not their thing, and then they'll move on. But for the most part, everyone does pretty well. All
right, so you've got you, the pilot. Can you tell me about the other positions on the plane?
So,
I'm guessing you're just monitoring the storm the entire time and giving weather information.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, during that type of a mission, we're launching weather instruments. We're looking out the window. We're providing situational awareness to the hurricane forecasters. What we're seeing, what we're experiencing in the airplane, because they're not there. There's no replacement to having someone there in the storm and experiencing that. Then we have the drops on operator, the load master. So we're basically telling them where we want them launched, and then they're QCing the data as it comes through, and then they send to us, and then we look at it from a weather perspective. Then we have the aircraft commander who's up in the front as one of the pilots. He's ensuring the mission is safe, like making sure that we do our mission. And then there's another pilot. There's two pilots in the seat, a co-pilot. And then there's a navigator who's telling us where to go. And he's watching the radars to make sure we don't go in anything unsafe as well.
I know that weather balloons are sometimes recovered. Do you ever hear about the drop zones being recovered? Do they ever pop up anywhere?
Very rarely. Not really.
But there's tons just out there in the ocean now.
Unfortunately, yeah. But I believe we've been told that they're like 95%, biodegradable. So there's that at least.
Okay, so do you have any stories of a time that you really remember, or a storm that really stood out to you that like you'll just never forget? I'm picturing, like you guys are on the front lines of like knowing when something's a Cat 5 all of a sudden, like we're waiting, all of us on the ground waiting. So I'm curious, do you have any just very memorable moments that you'll never forget? Any missions that stand out?
Back in this like 16 and 17, I flew in a couple of those big ones like Hurricane Matthew. Hurricane Irma, Maria, that caused a lot of damage. So Hurricane Irma, I flew on that storm as it basically peaked and flew over, I think it was St. Martin, and we could tell from the air at 10,000 feet, like the entire runway was the beach. Like the water and the beach was totally over that runway. And if you're familiar with St. Martin, the runway is right on the beach, like right by the ocean, and it looked like a beach. So we were able to see that. So that was very humbling. Like, wow, like Cat 5 just wiped this island out, and then continued to strengthen. Just knowing what it did was just, humbling. So just being a part of some of those missions, knowing that it's making a significant impact for the people on the ground and the Hurricane Center to issue their warnings. And then, of course, the emergency managers, like letting people know on the ground what's happening, what's going to happen. And then Matthew, seeing that, I was on the mission where it turned north. It became a Cat 5 overnight. And that was really memorable, too, because we were flying in that we knew it was going to be strong and it was going to make the turn and hit Katy, I think it was, on the west side. And that storm caused so much destruction. I think there were a lot of lives lost. And we were part of that mission right before it made landfall. So just knowing what you're doing and why it matters and what's important. So I would say that's some of the biggest impacts and to us as we fly these storms, knowing that it's going to make a big deal.
Can you talk briefly about what hurricane forecasting was like before hurricane hunting ever became a thing?
Well, really, I think back in the day, they didn't have much methods to send this information off the airplane. So, recently, like the last 20 to 30 years, we've been able to send dropson data, our vortex messages, which are from the center, like our inbound legs and the center when we get into the center. And then our high resolution data that we send off the airplane. So before that, I think a lot of it was communicated through radio. They would just basically fly the information and then they would report through communications, like voice communications, what they were seeing and what they did. So I'm not exactly sure if that stuff was put in the models. I doubt it. It was probably more real time forecasting. But now it's come so long, so far that, all the data that we send on our airplanes, us and the NOAA aircraft, is assimilate into these models almost, within minutes. And then it takes that data and it is, there's charts that show over the last 10 years, the data has improved the models like significantly from where they used to have like the area of uncertainty of the cone. Cone used to be gigantic. Now it's so narrow now. They really can pinpoint, down to, 100 miles of the center of where that storm's going to hit.
How long have you guys been flying into atmospheric rivers? And did you used to have winters off?
Kind of. So there was a time period before I came to the unit where they would go for 1 month up to either Alaska and Hawaii and fly these winter storms or these every other day they'd fly out in the Pacific. This is prior to 2010. I think 2010 they stopped that. There was a study done saying, oh, you guys are flying these. It's not worth flying because you're not impacting the models. Well, the problem was they were flying these canned tracks. They had these developed tracks. So it didn't matter where the weather was. You would just go out and fly dropsons, the weather instruments, into an area where there wasn't even weather. Well, of course, the study found that they didn't really impact the models because it wasn't custom. You weren't customizing where you flew, tailoring it based on where the weather systems were. Well, back in 2015, Scripps University started they were really invested in this project because it impacts them. It impacts California and agriculture and the economy and Oregon, Washington, and even inland states. So they really started doing this. They were like, hey, we want to fly aircraft into these storms, but we want to customize these tracks based on X variables. So they started doing this and they started looking at the models, looking at all the models, starting to develop these tools that actually help you tell where the model is going to be the most impacted. So we started tailoring our tracks, trying to it was a proof of concept. By doing what we're doing out there, does it impact the models? And what they did was they found that it significantly impacted the models. They were able to really refine the forecast by 10 to 15%, where the heaviest precip was going to hit. Manage the reservoirs a lot better in the West Coast by releasing water if it was going to be a flood or holding water in if it wasn't, billions of dollars of impacts. And then we became operational in 2020. So we've been doing this 3 years operationally. I think this was our 4th. Expanded over the years. And it's made huge impact to the West Coast of the United States of holding water in, mitigating floods, warning people where the heaviest precipit's going to be. Very similar to the impacts of a hurricane.
So it's worth working the winter months then, is what you're saying.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely taken a toll, I would say, on us because we don't have much time off now. So one of the things we're trying to do is show that our mission has grown and we need more resources to be able to do that. So hopefully in the next few years, we'll start to see that pan out.
Have you ever seen anything weird while you're up there flying around?
Saw a couple birds in the eye of hurricanes out in the middle of the
Birds are so hardcore. They're not scared of anything.
Like, what are you doing? Just flying around for days until you get over land? I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, this one was actually, I think I saw one in the Eye of Matthew in the Caribbean. Like, what in the world? And that's over the Caribbean. So hundreds of miles from land.
Do you think it just followed the eye for like hundreds of miles?
I don't know. Or it just went in the ocean because they flood, even 50-foot waves. Maybe it didn't, they stay on top of the water. I don't know.
Wow.
Riding the waves for days. I have no clue.
Well, good luck this season. We will have our fingers crossed for a safe ride and lots of information. And thank you for all you do.
And not a busy season.
Well, that was a fun chat with Ryan. I still have no desire to go on one of those flights. Off the Radar is a production of the National Weather Desk. And make sure you're following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes published every Tuesday. If you have a weather nerd in your life or someone that just may want to learn about hurricanes and hurricane hunting, please share this episode with them. We'd also love you to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Let us know what you think of the show and give me some ideas for future episodes. This podcast is produced, hosted, and edited by me. Special thanks to Richard Cook, Jay Mishkin, and the rest of the National Weather Desk team for their contribution. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie. Make it a great day.